Welcome back to Nifty 50 Photographers. And now if you've been watching my last few videos, you know I've been doing a lot on minimalist photography. And in today's video, I wanted to show you how you could just take a simple photo and transform it more into a fine art masterpiece style. Let me just show you what I've been doing over the last few weeks, how I've been learning this process. So I set off because I found somebody on Instagram and I really liked her style. Then I went out and did my own, and a few of you have seen my last week's video where I took a simple photo of a tree, and what I did was I blended an ICM image, that's an intentional camera movement image, with a standard exposure image. And I've done that with a few other subjects, like this boat here on a beach that's waiting for the tide to come in. Here is a little dinghy. Did a separate one with a dinghy. And I've also done some that looking out to sea. Now, when I've been composing these images, I've been imagining what the scene is going to look like when I blur it. So the intentional camera movement image, I'm imagining the lines across the photo and what colors I'm going to get and what contrast I'm going to get. So that is part of the start. You've got to think a little bit about what photo you're going to take and how it's going to look when you blur that background. And you want to get some vibrant and contrasting colors. Now, the other thing I'll say for you, this works equally well in both landscape and portrait formats, even though you might be blurring your image across the scene, as you can see in this picture of the fishing boat. And it also works well in very low contrast scenes where there's not much saturation, as you can see in this boat in Windermere. And finally, the other thing you can do is if you've got a lot of verticals in your image, you can do your ICM image up and down rather than panning across the scene. You tilt it up and down, as you can see in this picture of a boat on a lake. The other great thing I've found is you don't have to be spot on with your photography. If you make some small error and perhaps everything's not in focus. See in this image of Blackpool Tower here, this was a bit of a long exposure and I think I got some camera shake. It was a really windy day and you can see it's just slightly out of focus. But actually it doesn't really matter because the fine image is going to be very moody and about the scene. It's not going to be necessarily about having a pin sharp subject. Now, I've also taken some images that were generally pure landscapes. Taking this one in the Teesdale Valley because I loved how the little white, black and white farmhouses stood out against the landscape. And I did the same technique. Took an ICM image, took a standard image, and I blended the two together. I was pretty happy with the results, but I wasn't quite convinced that it was the best way of doing it. Now, like many things in photography, there's always more ways you can do it. So I did some research and found another technique, which actually in some ways is a lot simpler, but also lends itself to other styles of photos. So I'm not going to discard my technique of blending two images, an ICM and a standard image, but I think for some subjects it'll work much better. And this is one of them. Taken that same photo and I turned it into a slightly different style using a different technique, and I think it's worked really well. So I went back and the tree photo we used in the video from last week, I recreated that using that same technique and came up with this. I think actually it looks quite a lot better. Then I went out and tried it with some other subjects. Now here's a guy cycling up a hill. It's a very steep hill actually. He is actually going very slowly. When I've used this technique, it's really created some movement in the shot. It's given it a new dynamic feel, and I'm really pleased with how this came out. Here's another example, some guys fishing on a beach where I've done the same kind of thing. So I'm going to show you now exactly how I do that. And we're going to start with a simple image in Lightroom. So I'm going to start with this photo in Lightroom. This is a little ferry that runs across from Fleetwood over to Pilling, if that means anything to you in Lancashire. Just does a very short crossing. It's a little passenger ferry. But the reason I've chosen this scene is because it's a very simple scene and I've got some areas that I'm thinking about when I'm going to create the blur in this photo. And the idea of the blur is it's going to take out a lot of the clutter you get in the photo. You see in the background here is actually some power stations and stuff like that, which is not really what I want in my photo, but I couldn't frame it without that being there. So what I'm looking for is there's a contrast between the sea and the sky. So seascapes are great for this, but any landscape will do. But really what you want to do is try and find a fairly simple image with one main subject. So I've got my main subject of the boat, and the first thing I'm going to do in Lightroom is just do some very basic development from it. So I'm literally going to hit auto on the exposure, and I want to bring out some of the colors in the sky. So I'm going to apply, let's select the sky, and now I want to dehaze it because I want to bring up the blue, so I want to take out some of the background. But if I apply some dehaze, you can see already now we've got a lot more interest in the sky. So that'll do for that. So let's close that down. And it's probably actually pretty close to what I want to take into Photoshop. So now we're going to take this into Photoshop. So we go to Photo, we go to Edit in Photoshop. Wait for Photoshop to open up. Right, once that's opened up, now what I want to blur is pretty much everything but the subject. Now previously I was doing this by intentional camera movement, but now we're going to use a blur tool in Photoshop. And what I'm first going to think about is what do I want to keep sharp. I'm just going to duplicate the first layer, just give me a chance if I make any mistakes. I've got a duplicate. And the thing I want to select really is the boat, but I'm also going to want to get a bit of its reflection and probably the wake behind it. Now, a couple of ways you could do this. You could select and mask it, which is the way I like to do it, or you could simply select it, duplicate it onto another layer. So I'm going to select and mask it. So I'm just going to do this with the magic tool here. Let's see if it'll select the subject. Press select subject. It's got that. Now actually I want to add in this. Let me just move this out of this. So I want to add in this wake, and I also need the reflection and bits around the boat, but I'm going to do that as a separate selection, I think. And it's missed a bit of the framework as well, so we'll go ahead and select and mask that, and then we'll tidy up the mask with a brush. Okay, so I'm just going to add in a little bit. If you choose the plus symbol up here, you can then go over the bits. Let's zoom in and add in some of the bits I want. I want this tower here. Make my brush a little bit bigger. I'm going to select this railing and this one here. I know there's some sea behind that. I'm actually not too worried about making this super accurate, because I'm going to deal with that in the mask, and I'll pick up that aerial and stuff there as well. Okay, so happy with that, click OK, and it'll go ahead and create the mask. So there it is. Now what I'm going to do, if I switch off the background layer, you can see that's our mask, and I'm going to just tidy this up using the brush tool. So I take the brush tool, and I'm going to, if I have it on black, it'll paint stuff away. If you have it on white, it'll bring it back. So I'm going to paint away this bits of background and just tidy that up. Now, rather than bore you to death while I paint around all this, I'll do all that, and then we'll come back and I'll show you what I'm going to do next. So that's our boat all selected and masked. Let me turn off the background and you can see what it looks like. Now I want to work on a couple of other things, just so when you drop this into the background, it's going to look a bit more realistic rather than just dumped into the middle of the image. So what I want to do is, now there's a bit of reflection of the boat in the water. There's also a bit of wash behind it. and I think they might be things that I want to include in the image and not be as blurred as the rest of it. So I'm going to just copy the reflection of the boat. So make sure you're working on the right layer, and you don't need to select very exactly. I'm going to pick up where I think it's reflected in the water and just do a rough selection of that. Right, now I'm just going to copy and paste it onto a new layer. So you can do that with Command C, Command V. So now I've got that on a new layer. Now I'm going to do exactly the same with the wash out of the back. So I've got that on a new layer as well. So now I want to get rid of everything in the image that is going to be sharp in the final image. So I'm just going to use the patch tool for that, and we'll just draw around roughly the boat and its wash, and then we're going to move it so it's out of scene. Trying to keep the horizon in about the same place. So something like that. So that's the, now we'll deselect everything, and now this is the image we're now going to blur. So we go to Filter, Blur Gallery, and Path Blur. And there are a couple of things you can alter. One is the speed and the other is the taper, and just play around with them. What I usually find is you need to alter the speed to a high value to get enough blur into your image. So I'm going to up that. I'm going to try it at, let's say 400, and see how that looks. I'm reasonably happy with that now, and so I'm going to commit to that. And once it's done that, I'm going to bring back in the sharp bits of the image and just blend them in slightly. Okay, so that's revealed all our other layers. So we've got our boat, we've got our reflection, and we've got the wash in. And now it's really just about blending the reflection and the wake bit in. So let's, I'm just going to label these so I know what's going on. So this layer here is the reflection. So let me just rename that to reflection so I know where I'm at. And I'm going to rename this one to wash, because that's the wash from the back of the boat. And let's work on the reflection. Now, what I'm going to do to this is just apply a little bit of blur to that using a different tool. I'm going to use the motion blur tool. And I want the blur to be in roughly the same direction as the rest of the image. And now I'm just going to play with how much blur I want in that. Still want to see the reflection of the boat, but I don't want it to look glaringly obvious, and I think that's okay. Right, let's do the same to the wash. So let's blur that using some motion blur. And I think that also looks about right with the same amount of blur, so let's do that. Now the reason I did those as two separate layers is in case I wanted to work on them differently. I might have wanted to do a different level of blur on the wash to the reflection. Now I've got that there, I'm going to merge these two layers together. So we'll merge those two layers, and now I'm actually going to apply let's apply a layer mask to those. I'll get on. Okay, and now I'm going to get my brush and I'm going to set its flow and opacity, let's say about 35%, somewhere around there, doesn't have to be exact, about the same, and brush size a bit bigger. And I'm going to make sure the brush is very soft, so reduce its hardness to 0, and then we're just going to paint around the edges of those two bits of the image just to soften them into the background so they don't look quite as harsh. Might make that brush a little bit bigger, especially at the front here, so we've still got a bit of our reflection. And that's now looking, I think, like a decent image. Got a bit of reflection in the water. It's not obvious that the blur, the sharp bit and the blurred bit are different. They do blend nicely in the background. You could, if you want, just go over the boat very gently if you felt that was too much and it wasn't blending in the background. And what I tend to do is then set my opacity or something really quite low, 15%, same with the flow, 15%, nice soft brush, make it quite big and just go around the edges, but make sure you're on the right layer and on the layer mask. So that's the layer with the boat on with the mask, and work on the mask, make sure, and just very, very carefully go around the outsides of that and just apply just a little bit, and it'll just make it feel like it's dropped a bit more into the background. Once you're happy with all that, we can save it, and I will take it back into Lightroom now and just develop that a second time. Now the first thing I tend to do is change the profile. So I want a color profile, and let's just go for all the color ones. And I usually like, for this kind of photo, to go to something artistic. And if you hover over them, it shows you what it's going to do. Artistic and modern, I think, work both well. So I'm just going to hover over those and see, really, and this is personal choice, which one I like the most. And actually, modern 1 is a favourite. Artistic 4 is a favourite. Go with modern 1. You can change the amount it applies if you felt it's too much. You might just tone it back a wee bit to about 70%. Happy with that, close. And now I'm just going to make the photo a bit more visually attractive. I'm going to bring in a bit more colour and contrast in particular. So I'm going to up the contrast a bit. And I'm definitely going to have a look at the colour of the sky. Let me set the contrast here to medium. And let's just have a play with some of these others. I don't know whether I want any. I don't think I need any more. Maybe no, I'm not. Dehaze, a global dehaze is a bit too much because it's affecting the foreground. But I will boost the vibration, the vibrance and the saturation a little bit. And then I'm going to play with the saturation and luminance. And if you pick up this little tool here, bring it onto your image, you can drag colours up and down. So just hold your left mouse button down and slide your mouse up and down so you can do something a bit more colourful with that. So I'm working on luminance at the moment, so I'm taking the blue luminance down a bit, and I'm not going to go too far, but this is more an artistic image, so it doesn't have to be completely realistic. You can do what you like with the colours. I'd like to take this red up a bit in the boat, so do the same with that. And the colours in the sea affects the sky because it's largely blue, so I'm going to worry too much about that. And let's just have a look at the saturation. Maybe take the saturation of the blue down a tiny bit. What's it like in the sea? Very grey. Okay. And then I'm going to work on the colour grading. So let's have a look at the midtones. Where's the midtones? So if you click on the symbol above, you get a larger version of it and you play around. Now what I like to do is slide this little circle out, do it extreme first, and just go round circle and see if there's anything that I think helps the image. And I think I quite like it a little bit about there somewhere. Now I'm going to work on the shadows, and I just do exactly the same with that. Is that? And somewhere like there I quite like. And as you slide the circle from the inner point out to the circumference, you can see how much it's affecting the image. So I'm going to bring that out to there. And finally I'll work on the highlights, and these I usually like to try and make them a warmish colour. Let's see what we get here. Be careful, I don't want the white in the boat to change colour too much. I'm going to do this one quite subtly. Just do a little bit of that. So I'm happy with that. I'm not going to worry about sharpening because we've done all that blur. The only thing I might try is level it, so I might make sure my horizon's level. Then the final thing I do is sometimes I play around with the calibration, because this has a global effect on the colours in the image, and you can just play with these sliders and you see the colour dependency. So as I take the red down, see it also has a big effect on the blues. I'm going to take the red up a bit, which will also boost the blues. And let's have a look at the greens. So the green I'm going to boost up, and finally the blue down a little bit. Now the only other thing I feel like I've got a bit too much image with nothing in it in the top and bottom of it. So I'm going to crop this, and I usually crop these kind of images typically to a 16:9. So change the aspect to 16:9. Usually set the horizon to be about 1/3, but I'm going to just do it a little bit higher because I want the boat to be closer to 1/3 of the image. Might just bring that in a little bit as well. So it's something more like that. Maybe up a tiny bit more. And there you have it. That's my final image. The only thing I probably would do is apply a vignette. So just go down here, and I like to apply a dark one just to give the image a little bit of a border. And you could, if you like, put a couple of linear filters top and bottom. Let me perhaps show you what I mean here. So if we choose a linear gradient, and you can just do that in the top of the image, just take down the exposure a little bit, and that'll just darken it at the top. We'll do the same with another at the bottom. And that just gives it a little bit more of a border to the image. And if you're happy with that, then it's all done. So let me just summarize. So like everything in photography, there's always more ways of doing the same thing. I'm not sure I've got exactly the same technique as the people I've seen on Instagram yet, so I'm sure I've still got a lot to learn. But I would think when you're going to do this, set off thinking about it when you're taking your basic image. Remember that blurring it can get rid of a lot of the clutter, so it's great for making your image look more simple. If you've got a very cluttered foreground, you could think about using a technique like this for getting rid of it. Another great thing about it is I do a lot of landscape photography, and you're pretty much limited to going out the golden hour. But I think this works equally well in bright, harsh sunlight or on a cloudy day, so it doesn't matter so much about the weather conditions. It gives you a chance to go out and be creative and take an interesting and artistic photo. And finally, I would say it doesn't matter too much how good a photographer you are. Don't need everything in sharp focus. It's better if your subject is in focus. It doesn't have to be pin sharp, so you don't have to worry about all those focusing techniques that you might have been struggling with. So that's the other thing. One thing you should try and get right is probably your exposures, but if it's somewhere near, then it's probably good enough, because you're creating a bit of art, not so much a bit of photography, although photography does mean art with light, and this is taking it to that point. But I think it really helps create a lovely image because you're simplifying everything. And I hope you've enjoyed that and got something out of it. I'm going to keep making some of these and keep dabbling with this and experimenting and developing my style. So if you'd like to see more of that, do make sure you subscribe to the channel. In the meantime, go and have some fun. Let me know how you get on with it in the comments. I'd love to see some of your images. There is a Facebook group, which I'll put a link in the description to, and you can share them on there as well. In the meantime, I look forward to seeing you in the next video.